Hey everyone, welcome to our first virtual episode of AdTech Unfiltered. Today, we're going a little off script. The topic of the day focuses on these unusual times and how you, in your professional and personal life, can use reflection and mindful practices to make the most of this new normal. We're having this conversation with Lola Wright, a longtime conscious leadership coach and consultant. She's worked with entrepreneurs, creatives, tech startups, and professionals in several industries, including AdTech, to identify creative solutions in times of conflict. This conversation with Lola Wright on how to deal with adversity starts right now. Lola, thanks for hopping on the phone to discuss how working professionals can deal with these adverse and unusual times.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Millions of people are tasked to practice social distancing in some form, and it's impacting their days to varying extents. And specifically for our conversation today, since this is AdTech Unfiltered, we'll be examining the experience for people who work in advertising and marketing. I feel that most people who work in advertising and marketing have the distinct privilege of being able to shelter at home and, in most, if not all cases, work from home. Exactly how much of a privilege that is based on what your home life looks like, that's something we will also get into. So just to start at a high level, I want to level set with you on the fact that now we are living in a world in which people have been working at home for at least a couple of weeks. And they're trying to make sense of this moment in time. And what I've had a lot of people say to me is that they feel like they're on a hamster wheel, where like the day starts off one way, and then they're struggling with the workday, they're struggling with their personal life, they're trying to appreciate that they have the benefit of working from home, they don't feel like they're being grateful enough. It's just this like never-ending cycle of not feeling grateful enough, not being exactly happy enough. How can people make sense of this moment that are working from home?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the opportunity that we're being faced with, presuming that our basic needs are tended to, is really the inquiry of the mind. We have these incredibly brilliant, capable minds that we keep very busy in our normal lives. And they've been completely disoriented in a lot of ways. That which we've historically been able to rely on as a sense of stability and that which we've called normal has been disrupted. And the mind is wired to seek safety. It's wired to seek approval. It's wired to seek control. And we're living in a time where there are many unknowns. And so it makes sense that even when we can sort of logically say, why am I freaking out? I mean, my basic needs are met, and yet all kinds of anxiety may be surfacing, all kinds of restlessness may be surfacing. It really makes perfect sense.
What if I want to do that, but I'm just having this internal conflict? Because I think that's what a lot of people are experiencing. They know that other people are maybe making more of the opportunity than they are, but there's just this feeling of a never-ending unconscious resistance.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting. Even the way you pose the question, like the comparison that we make to how others are using the time versus how we are using the time. There again, that's what the mind does. It looks for threat. It looks for comparison, and I use a term that one of my mentors, Jim Dethmer, taught me years ago, and it's extra grace required. And, when we're leading organizations under stable circumstances, we might have a percentage of our team that is going through whatever life circumstances they're experiencing, whether it's a divorce or a death or student loan debt, whatever it is we are juggling in any given moment. And when one of our team members is in an acute experience, we can extend extra grace required. We understand this is a temporary experience and we can be more graceful. What we're all experiencing right now is a kind of acute circumstance. And of course, we can realize that we have varying degrees of privilege, varying degrees of access to resources, but nevertheless, based on where we are in an acute experience, and it's really an opportunity to extend extra grace to ourselves, first and foremost, and to those we encounter. The mind will always seek to compare, it will always seek to diminish. What I would say the practice is, and it's not an easy practice, it's simple but not easy, is to be with the discomfort. My concern for the impatience and the drive to get back to what was is if we do that, we will just be putting a band-aid over the restlessness.
So I want to put that in the context of what maybe people who are working from home in the ad tech or martech space might be feeling. And I think one of those things is that as much as we might be socially distanced in real life sense, we're not socially distanced in the digital sense. We're very connected to them through various types of work tools. And then also just social media. Like people are heavying up on those spaces because they're hungry to still do that examination because it feels so natural to them.
Yeah, or I would say they're avoiding the stillness of themselves.
Let's say that I'm gaining an appreciation for that fact. I think I'm experiencing this outward stillness, or I
Mhm.
am experiencing this outward stillness, but internally it's causing this like terrible friction. And so now
Totally.
I want to experience that stillness, but I'm not getting that peace. What can people practice at home knowing that they still have to function? They got to take care of their families. They need to do their jobs, and they're wrestling with the two sides of that, the stillness and the lack thereof inside.
At the risk of using one of the most overcited, overused words in popular culture, I'd start by saying meditation. There are a gazillion ways to practice meditation. My preferred style of meditation is with the purpose of, again, creating spaciousness between the reactivity of our thought patterns or the perpetual patterning of our thoughts and our breath. So, if we can place a little bit of awareness on the space between those two things, we can give ourselves a break. Meditation is not about the lotus position and Lululemon pants and a green drink. It's really about cultivating a deep sense of inner stillness. And you're absolutely right. Like your life may have a kind of outer stillness that's new to you. In a lot of the work that I'm doing with organizations and clients, what I'm hearing as feedback is that inner world is actually getting kicked up. It's more agitated, again, as I said, because the distractions of the outer world have been lessened. The inner world is becoming louder.
To that point, in terms of you doing work with other people in this time, what are people coming forth with as their greatest concern? What are common concerns you're hearing?
I think the thing I'm noticing the most is the futurizing, getting ourselves really worked up about what could be. When will this end? When it ends, what could happen? If I go out, what's the risk? If I don't go out, what's the impact to my family, to my business, to my relationships? And so there's a lot of anxiety and fear that's getting kicked up by futurizing. A simple practice of placing one hand on your chest, another hand on your belly, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And you might already be thinking like, oh my gosh, this is just too much for me. Just try it.
It's funny that you said it that way because even as you were just describing it, it made me think that the world probably falls into three camps: the people who've tried it and liked it, the people who've tried it and didn't like it, and then the people who just haven't tried it at all. And I bet people who are in the second and third category, the people who didn't like it and the people who haven't tried it, might be willing to take another stab at it. An industry specific question for you: are there any distinct competencies of people who work in marketing and advertising that they could and should be leaning on to get through this period of time?
Here's the thing that's cool about the industry that you all are in. You're masters of manipulating the unconscious mind. That's how your work works. You get into people's unconscious desires, fears, patterns, needs, wants, you manipulate them. And I don't use that word pejoratively, but you manipulate them to produce a particular outcome. Imagine you were to take those incredible skills and tools that you use for your clients and your business and map them onto your own life.
I think people lose sight of how calculated the approach to the work can be because I think a lot of people's focus
Hmm.
is really more so on the ability to connect creative messaging with consumers, or it's about leveraging emerging technologies and platforms, or it's just the social aspect of the work. It's a very social business. Many people are specifically hired for their people skills, especially people on the sell side. And given this crisis, suddenly that social acumen doesn't have the same value that it once did
Mm.
just even 7, 8 weeks ago. I think it's a particular challenge for people who are in this industry and were looking to and have always leaned on those skill sets.
We're having to learn how to do things in new ways that feel super uncomfortable. And we could be sort of like the petulant child about it and be like, nah, I don't want that. That doesn't work for me. Or we can be like, I got to surrender because this is how it is right now. And you hear a lot these days in education around growth mindsets. And it's like you could sort of be like, wah wah, I got it. What I am suggesting is that you consider that you also have this incredible higher capacity to your consciousness, to your brain. That being said, I absolutely know the evolutionary nature of existence. Like we've all seen it in our own lives where something happened a decade ago, 2 decades ago. And at the time, it was like, no way am I going to be able to weather this storm. And we could never have predicted what would have happened in the wake. And yet that happened. And wow, what learning, what growth. And so I think that's really the opportunity for this now. It's like what is the revolution or the evolution to advertising and marketing that's wanting to be delivered by way of this like being brought to our knees moment?
Many people in this industry would argue that our industry has already been brought to its knees. Robustly popular solutions for clients and brands have had the whip cracked at them because they no longer coincide with regulative expectations set by CCPA and GDPR. We're also in an industry that's heavily dependent or has been heavily dependent on third party cookies, which are going away. And now COVID has showed up and
Mhm.
it's inflicting this instant havoc on the economy and so many of the brands and advertisers that we all in the industry support.
Yeah, and the paradox there is that that is when creativity gets amplified. Like again, as a young single mom, some of the most creative meals that I delivered to my young children were the ones that had the fewest amount of resources. And I don't say that like to disregard the real challenges. I'm just saying like we get to choose. We get to choose and we've become a little gluttonous. And for some of us, like who haven't lived through different cycles of the economy, I'm of an age where I've lived through a few cycles. Now, I've never experienced a pandemic, but I've experienced the Great Recession. I've experienced post 9/11. There have been iterations of recalibrations for a whole variety of reasons. And there is a kind of grit and resiliency that one can develop when they realize they are capable of incredible, extraordinary, beautiful things without all the luxuries. I don't want to endorse a kind of like unnecessarily scrappy existence, but I just think that we can get used to luxuries that are not as necessary as we think they are when we are enjoying them. And then the other thing I would just say is like, again, I just want to give all of us a lot of grace right now. And the mind is one center of intelligence, but you have two other very significant centers of intelligence. One is your EQ, your emotional intelligence, and the other is your BQ, your body intelligence. So your IQ is just one third of these three primary centers of intelligence. May this be an opportunity for human beings to become more intimately familiar with their emotions and with their body.
Something I heard you say, Lola, was, if I was to summarize it, was that you were testing and learning in your home environment, which is also your work environment now. And then you came to this realization that you had overextended yourself. And then
Mhm.
you had to do a reevaluation, have like an open conversation with the other people who live in your home, and then reevaluate from that point. And I think that people are experiencing something similar in some cases as it relates to work, because you can no longer be physically present in an office environment. And now you're saying, like, there is no line between when I wake up
Hmm.
and when I go to sleep and when the workday begins and ends. Like, it's all blurring together at a level that they've never experienced before, not just because they're working from home, but because we're in this like terrible economic crisis. So people want to overextend and then might come to that realization, but don't have they may have some reservations about how they go about having that same conversation that you described, like a
Mhm.
fear of saying, you know what, I was trying to do a whole lot, but what I came to realize is that what I'm doing is not sustainable, but I'm afraid of what
Mhm.
it is going to say about me and my work ethic during this crisis.
Yeah, I think that's a very typical pattern these days, and I think that it is unsustainable. I think that it will like, when I hear leaders these days talking about the measures of control they're putting in place to manage their own fear, it is a losing formula. It may not blow up immediately, but it's not going to have the kind of sustainable results that leaders imagine it will. I think the greatest gift we can all give as business evolves is to practice more authenticity and to be like radical truth tellers with one another of what works and what doesn't. I have a good friend who's a big producer at a commercial real estate firm, and their business has basically dried up, and it's pretty halted right now. And the firm, in an effort to, I would suspect, in an effort to manage their complete fear of that which is occurring, they're instituting an insane and excessive amount of conference calls every day. And so it's really just unconscious fear that's getting put in place as unreasonable layers of control. Then there becomes this kind of like judgmental culture of like what people are or aren't doing enough of. And I will tell you, like, it doesn't have the results leaders are desiring. It actually has sort of the reverse effect. And so I think that the more and more industry leaders can be honest, like, hey, we don't know. This is super uncomfortable. We've been through difficult times before, and we have an opportunity to reinvent what we're doing here, to reimagine. But we first want to like honor the fact that this is uncomfortable. We're all getting a crash course in the grip of fear.
I want to dig a little deeper into the example you just shared, about leaders practicing measures of control that can't be sustained. And I think what things like that come down to, like the obsession with conference calls, is that people want to have performance indicators that
Mhm.
they can tally up and say, I don't see these people, but I know what they're doing. Look, I've counted it up. But then I think the issue becomes, if you are creating more space, what are you creating that space for as it relates to your employees?
Yeah, I mean, I operate under the assumption, and sometimes I do this more effectively than at other times, but I operate under the assumption that there is a good intention that is motivating all human beings. Now, that doesn't mean you've tapped into it as a leader. That doesn't mean that you are in relationship with it. But if you actually trust sort of the goodness of your employees and you see them as your allies and not your enemies, then it becomes about, what can we co-create together? Like, are we working against one another, or could we create a model where we're working for and with one another? This is where we get to be creative. And for some of us, that might mean having difficult conversations with the people who we report to. That may mean having difficult conversations with an executive team. And if you can do it from a place of curiosity, and if you can do it from a place that's clean, then who knows what you could create? I mean, I suspect that there will be all kinds of alternative solutions for people that get produced out of this that will have really, really great impacts on people's lives. But again, that's a choice. If we choose to experience this as an opportunity versus like an existential threat.
How should leaders be approaching their management style when their employees could be working from this fear-based place?
I think the more that leaders can be proactive versus reactive, it's just a much better setup. And then I would say, like, if you're experiencing something in your environment that really isn't working for you, how can you reveal yourself? It may feel awkward and uncomfortable for many, but when you allow your emotional intelligence, your feeling states, and your body intelligence to guide you and inform you in that process, people will feel it. People will trust you. But when you come from trying to figure something out and get a particular outcome, people are inherently suspicious. We are living in a desert of authenticity. Like, we are so thirsty for people's realness. So share what's authentically going on for you, and to trust that the people you're sharing it with actually have an interest in supporting you.
Final question for you. Any parting words of wisdom on how people can more successfully work from home and live from home at a time of such incredible uncertainty?
Yeah, I would start by saying develop an increased sense of self-awareness. What's scaring you? What's angering you? What's saddening you? Like, what is going on where you are? When we are not aware of what's occurring in us, we start projecting our fears and anger and sadness onto the world before us. So I think, first of all, just really developing a practice of noticing what's happening where you are. I mean, that is a game changer. People don't even know what to do with that kind of communication because it's so foreign. But it will alter the spaces that you're in, and it will be just the most generous way of practicing relationships that really I think any of us could ever ask for.
Well, I think there's never been a better time for anyone who's out there dealing with this crisis to become more self-aware, whether it's in relation to the work that they're doing from home and other circumstances they're facing as they're socially distancing. So, Lola, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me today.
I am so grateful. I think you all are doing incredible work, and I'm happy to contribute.
Thanks to Lola Wright for joining us to discuss dealing with adversity and growing under pressure. This was not a usual episode focused on emerging trends or industry leaders, but we're in an unusual time. Ad tech, like most industries, has people at the center of it. So with that said, I hope you're doing well in this time that requires us to continue staying socially distanced, and I hope when it's safe that soon we can return to a life where we can live and work in person with one another. I'm your host, Noor Nasir. We'll see you next time for more Ad Tech Unfiltered.